Hello and welcome back to Perspectives, bringing you our daily dose of news and views we hope are relevant to you. In today's show, with the realistic prospect of Narendra Modi's reign coming to an ignominious end, we take an in-depth look at just how extensive the Gautam Adani scandal is and its links to the Indian Prime Minister, and what it means for both Modi himself and the Sikh community in Punjab and across the diaspora. And talking about Modi, his links to North Korean people trafficking come under the spotlight as well in today's show. And in Canada, foreign interference from India once again is targeted in a new report and how the country plans to tackle it. Well, all this and more in today's show, and joining me as always for Perspectives is our very own correspondent in Canada, James Cousineau. Good morning, James.
Good morning, Angus, and welcome back from what I hope was a great weekend for all of our viewers. Thanks for tuning in once again.
Indeed, and James and I together will be bringing you our perspectives on the daily news affecting the Sikh community across the world. And of course, as usual at the end of the show, we'll be taking a look at loads of your great comments which have been pouring in the bucketfuls below our videos. So thanks very much indeed for those. Now, before we start and before I hand over to James, just a quick mention. Now, many of you have very kindly in our audience said, well, how can we get involved in the show? How can we donate? Well, as you do know, and we have advised you, we have been demonetised. Yes, the great Indian machine doesn't like the fact that we spread a bit too much truth, a bit too much uncomfortable truth about what's going on. And of course, you will be aware that we are banned in India. You are technically not able to see our show and the truth that we reveal in India because we've been blocked by the Indian regime. And of course, they've been working very hard to close us down and do their very best to prevent us speaking out the truth. So we are, you may not be aware, but we are actually across on many other platforms. And if you look in our description below our video today, and of course in all our videos going forward, we will be providing what we call a link tree. Now this is some very clever piece of technology. If you click on that link, it will show you a full list of all the platforms that you can find us on. That will be on Apple and Roku and all these amazing platforms that I have to confess I don't know very much about, but you can find us there. And if you click on all those links, we're on Facebook, we're on all major social media. And more importantly, you can actually contribute to this show. As you know, we're demonetized, so we're no longer making any money at all from YouTube. Thanks, YouTube. Despite the fact that we hit 20,000 subscribers recently, thank you to all of you, and thank you for joining us, and thank you for subscribing. We do not make a penny anymore on YouTube. We don't make a cent, which of course does cause us a few problems, as of course this show does require a lot of people involved to make it happen. So thank you to everybody who does contribute on a voluntary basis from the team here. But you can get involved, you can contribute, and every contribution, even if it's 10 cents, it is greatly appreciated. So if you click on those links, and you will find particularly on our website, satlujnetwork.tv, that's satlujnetwork.tv, you will find a link that allows you to support the channel, that supports us, supports the team to keep allowing us to bring you the truth. And you'll find a link on there. And also there is another link again on our network, and it's very clear, that says support our cause. And if I read you a quick bit of the blurb, it says, at Satluj Network, we are committed to delivering the truth with integrity and transparency. Our team of dedicated journalists, that's James and myself, and of course many others on our Punjabi speaking side, we are here to bring you tirelessly, as it says, bringing you accurate and unbiased news. I won't say tirelessly, James and I are exhausted because it's very hard work. But we will continue to bring this accurate and unbiased news, keeping you informed and empowered. Your support is vital in our mission to uphold the highest standards of journalism and to continue providing the trustworthy news that you can rely on. Together, we can ensure that the truth prevails. Thank you for standing with us. So that's a brief note from us. We don't ever really ask for money, but if you are able to donate, it would be hugely appreciated, because we want to continue providing the truth to you, our audience, our wonderful audience out there, who also provide us with that moral support as well, with your comments and your just general feelings of support, which James and I very much appreciate. So do get along to our website. If you can donate, that would be massively appreciated. Thank you to each and every one of you who does support us and who hopefully will contribute to our channel. With that, James, I shall hand you over for our first story. Away you go.
Absolutely, Angus. Now, of course, if you're able to contribute, I know that we had a few people in the comments section asking, feel free to follow the links, but hey, we will not ask for your firstborn. That is unlike President Vladimir Putin, who seems to be asking for your first, your second, your third if you're in India or in North Korea. It has come out that they are sending different people from their respective countries over to fight, not only in the Russia-Ukraine conflict or war, but they're also sending people to danger zones in the Middle East. And this is going on right under the Modi and other governments' noses. And I can't even say that they are unaware, because they are fully aware. Now, we know that sometime back that Narendra Modi and Vladimir Putin did have a discussion about the human trafficking, about the nefarious networks that were actually working as employment consultants and bringing people from India and putting them into positions within the military. Now, the issue is that they were told they were taking other roles or other jobs within the country or in non-military positions, and then they ended up getting there, being fooled, and then basically told to either get out and fight on behalf of Russia, or they would die there in Russia. So, they are basically working against their own citizens, against mothers and fathers, by sending their kids off to war, by sending them over to areas in the Middle East that are under attack, that are very unsafe, and yet they don't seem to care. And when it comes to Kim Jong-un, he is sending thousands and thousands over there, again, to fight on behalf of Russia. And this has come out not only through the United Nations and through NATO, that China, North Korea, and by ignorance, that Modi is also a part of this regime that is propping up Russia. Now, this is just disgusting. Not only are they sending money, increasing trade, buying oil and gas, which, they are kind of limited in that regard. But at the end of the day, they are trafficking in human lives. Lives are being lost. And this has been going on for decades when it comes to the poor, the impoverished, those who look for work and can't find it at home in India. And they want to provide for their families. So when they get these offers, including from Russia, saying, hey, come on over, you'll make a great wage for the first 3 months, and then after that, you'll get a raise that, you'll be just living like a king, essentially. Plus, if you want, we're going to give you Russian citizenship on top of that. Now, this is not happening. They are just being basically fooled and lied to get them over there, and then they're being taken advantage of. They are also being put along the lines in Israel and along the borders there, operating and working for people that are putting them in harm's way. And the Indian government is doing nothing to protect their citizens. They need to go after these unscrupulous so-called employment consultants, shut them down, put them in prison, and protect their citizens. These, again, as I said, are children or kids. They're adults, but they still have mothers and fathers. They have brothers and sisters. They sometimes have children of their own, and yet they're being taken over there and being fully exploited. And this has been happening also in areas of Saudi Arabia, Qatar, the United Arab Emirates, where the workers are over there on the promise of excellent wages, excellent conditions, and then they end up being abused, neglected, malnourished. I mean, the list goes on, and a lot of employers take advantage and don't even pay them properly. And this is a problem in the Western world that we're seeing, but nowhere near on that scale. But we also see this happen on occasion in Canada, in the US. I'm not saying that we're perfect, but we are not exploiting them to put them in harm's way. We are not putting them on battlefields, and we are not sending them home in caskets, Angus. It's just a disgusting situation that these leaders are contributing to this ongoing war and bloodshed by sending them to fight in Ukraine and into the war zones in in the Middle East. Now, right now, India, of course, has an issue with modern slavery, and they estimate the number of people in India alone that are working in slavery positions is 8 people per 1,000, and that works out to just over 11 million people. 56 out of 100 people and citizens are at risk and vulnerable to these situations. The government response rating is 46 out of 100. So they are responding very slowly and very inadequately to protect their population. And once again, they have a population of 1.38 billion people, but it doesn't make excuses why they are not protecting, even if it works out to a smaller amount. Now, as you can see in the image on your screen, this is in Ukraine, where people are sleeping in the subway systems on the platforms, trying to hide from the air raids that are happening above. And people are in that train on the far side that you can see. People are living in those trains because they can't go up into the city out of fear of the air missile attacks and everything else that's going on there. And I've been there. This is a picture that I took personally when I was in Ukraine covering the war. And I tell you, it is just a horrid situation when it comes to people not even being able to go about their lives, to live in safety and security. And yet here we are, over 1,000 days in, and the war continues. And now Vladimir Putin is importing soldiers and workers to die for his country. It's just not right, Angus.
It's appalling, and it's interesting. Just as one slightly side issue there is in those statistics. Modern slavery in India, they reckon it's 8 in every 1,000 of the population. Well, of course, that doesn't even account for the simple fact that of the Dalit population, the caste system, that the lower caste actually occupy about 80% of the population. The Dalit caste, the lowest caste, essentially are in some form of slavery themselves. And in fact, even the middle caste themselves are trapped within a system of slavery without them clearly realising it. So that's even just a side issue. But certainly when it comes to people trafficking, I think what's interesting, this war in Ukraine, for Russia to perpetuate this war and to operate this war, it needs 3 main things. It needs money, it needs arms, and it needs people. Now, of course, we talked a lot in the past about the links between India and Russia, these historic links. And in fact, I was even going to today do a story about how Indian agents are actually helping Russia arm itself. They're actually, through various back channels, providing armaments to Russia to continue this war. But we'll probably cover that story tomorrow. But what we do know is that India is buying Russian oil. Against all international sanctions, India remains or continues to purchase Russian oil, thus providing money for the Russian war machine. Arms, of course, Russia's manufacturing a lot of its own arms quite successfully, and of course it has the money now, thanks to India, to manufacture its own arms. But as I've said, also India is assisting in providing arms to continue the war. And of course, the third element of this is people. And here we go, people. Now, the population of Russia is about 143 million, give or take. Population of India, 1.4 billion. Population of China, about 1.4, 1.3 billion. So it's very telling that the 2 most populous countries in the world, over 1 billion people in their populations. India, of course, being the most populous country, it's quite happy to traffic people because the Indian government sees people as a commodity. People are meaningless to the Indian government. It has so many of them, it doesn't care about them. If you're the average Indian, even a Hindu, they don't care about you. You're just seen as a commodity to be trafficked, to be used for their own purposes. This is why the Brahmins remain in control of India, because they see you, the average ordinary Hindu, or the Muslim, of course Sikhs, as we talk about regularly, they just see their ordinary population as a commodity to be used and abused. And they're more than happy to traffic their own population to parts of the world to continue its own agenda. And this is what we see right across the world. And of course, it's importing its own people quite happily into the Russian war machine, because Russia, with its small population of 143 million, needs people to feed its army, to go into that meat grinder on the Ukrainian front. Yeah. That's what it's all about. These people, these despots, see people as a useful commodity to use for their own purposes. So you see something in common here. You've got Vladimir Putin, you've got Narendra Modi and Xi Jinping. They are despots. They are rulers of these huge countries under totalitarian control. They don't care about their people. In China, they don't care about their people. In India, they don't care about their people. And in Russia, they don't care about their people. It's been seen throughout history. So, James, unfortunately, this story I just find is a tragedy of massive proportions. All we can do is try and highlight to the people of India, you are slaves. You are a commodity to your government. And this is all you will ever be seen as. You don't even realise it. And when they try to shut channels like us down, that's what it's all about, because they don't want us to wake you up to this fact that you are just a commodity to be used and abused, James. That's all it's about.
Exactly, Angus. And I also want to mention that as a member of the International Federation of Journalists, that 4 journalists that I had met while I was in Ukraine never made it home. Within the next month and a half, they were lost in the war. They had their bodies shipped home to their families. So again, our thoughts are with all journalists around the world that are victims of this repression against the journalism industry. So with our next story, Angus, I wanted to bring up
James,
a very important... Sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, Jess, just want to jump in there, because actually, that's an important point to make about the journalism. I think, it is tragic when journalists lose their lives in places like war zones, but we mustn't forget the journalists, the brave journalists in India, particularly J&K and places like that, where they have been courageous enough to stand up and try and highlight the truth in India. What happens to them? They get locked up, or worse, they certainly get intimidated, they get harassed, their families get harassed, they get detained in prison. This is why India sits in the bottom 10% in the Global Free Press Index. It is one of the worst countries on the planet for a free press, because the journalists in India are constantly harassed and intimidated into silence. So, James, I think that is a very important point to raise. So thank you for that.
Yeah, absolutely, Angus. And, there's a lot of information that they try to filter on both sides, no matter what war zone or what situation it is. And there were points where we were out and we would be held with machine guns literally pointed at our heads while they go through our cameras, deleting some footage that they didn't like, and going through our phones to make sure we were not communicating with Russians and so forth. So, that to me is still lucky compared to what some of the journalists out there, especially in India and in Russia and that are what they're going through. So again, our thoughts are with all of them, Angus.
Indeed.
So let's take a look at, as we talked so much about the transnational repression and the foreign interference, there is a new handout that's been developed by the Canadian government, and it's called Foreign Interference and You. This is basically looking to get the Canadian public to understand what exactly is foreign interference and what can you do as an individual or as an organization to help the government to identify it and to report it so that they can move it forward in the investigations. So I thought that it was worth bringing up on this show, and I'm not going to cover it all, but definitely if you email us, I'd be happy to send you an email copy of the PDF. Or you can also find it, of course, on the Government of Canada website at canada.ca. And you can take a look at it. And essentially, it just looks at what is foreign interference. And we've covered this in length, Angus. And just a very brief description as to what they've put is foreign interference is a deliberate and covert activity undertaken by a foreign state to advance its interests, often to the detriment of Canada. And of course, we know that this happens from India, from China, from Russia. There's a lot of influence going on in Canada at this time with the Ndutva and everybody else. So again, CSIS Act describes foreign influenced activities, which is another term for foreign interference, as activities within or related to Canada that are detrimental to the interest of Canada and are clandestine or deceptive or involve a threat to any person. So it's not just against politicians and lobbyists or such, it's against anybody. So again, you can go on and read a bit more of the description there, but I just wanted to cover some of the bigger parts here so we don't spend too much time on it. But it is, again, just email us if you would like a copy of it. And what I'm going to do is just scroll down and take a look at a couple of the points here. Now, Canada's fundamental institutions, it talks about in terms of who and what is targeted. So academia, free press, democratic institutions, government processes, and diverse Canadian communities are all active targets of foreign interference activities. And of course, on our channel, we talk about it in the context of the threat of the India government, of state, influencers, and the Hindutva against the Khalistan referendum, and those people who are trying to stimulate the conversation or encourage the vote through the referendum. So elected and public officials across all levels of government representing all political parties are targeted. Members of parliament, members of provincial legislatures, municipal officials, and representatives of indigenous governments, public servants, ministerial and political staff, and others with input into or influence over the public policy decision-making process. So again, it could be the Senate, could be the House of Commons, the Parliament, whatever that case is. So hostile foreign actors also target the fabric of Canada's multicultural society, seeking to influence Canadian communities, including through threats, manipulations, and coercion. Some of these communities are vulnerable targets of foreign interference from states seeking to exploit them in various ways to advance the foreign state's interests, sometimes to the detriment of Canadian values and freedoms. And again, that points right towards India, China, Russia, and several other states that we know of. So foreign interference in academia and research, it goes on to explain that. And again, I'm just going to skip over it because I don't want to spend too much time on the story, but I thought that it was important that you're aware of it and that you can get a copy of this as well. And what I thought was really important is this section here on online influence. And it states that a growing number of states have built and deployed programs dedicated to undertaking online influence as part of their daily business. Adversaries use online influence campaigns to attempt to change civil discourse, policymakers' choices, government relationships, and the reputation of politicians and countries, both nationally and globally. They try to delegitimize the concept of democracy and other values such as human rights and liberty, which may run contrary to their own ideological views. They also try to exacerbate existing friction in democratic societies around various divisive social, political, and economic issues, while online foreign influence activities tend to increase around elections. These ongoing campaigns have broadened in scope since 2018, expanding to react and adapt to current events, shifting their content strategies around trending news stories and popular political issues. So, of course, you can see this again pointing towards India, how they just target Justin Trudeau and the Canadian Parliament. They target of course, the NDP, the Liberal Party, but you don't see much of them targeting the Conservatives in Canada. And there is a lot to be said there because the Conservatives are alleged to have had foreign interference involved in the last two leadership races for the party. And the fact that the Conservative leader, Pierre Poilievre, has refused to get top security clearance so that he can actually read into Canada's security. And this is a guy who wants to run to be the next Prime Minister of Canada. So again, it also goes on to tell you things that you can do as an individual or as an organization. So let's go through those very quickly. As an individual, be aware of the threat. Increasing our collective resilience against foreign interference is a shared responsibility. Do your due diligence before sharing information or entering into arrangements. Know your partners and assess the risks of any partnership in advance. So if you're looking to gain investors or partners in a business, you want to make sure that you vet them so that you're not getting into a situation that you really don't want to be involved in, because it could be a foreign state that is acting through an individual to get some kind of a foothold into the Canadian business industry, and you just want to be aware of that. Be cyber safe, of course. Be careful about any attachments and information that you open that you're not aware of, because they can hack in and watch what you're doing in your computer systems, or just take control of your systems, which we've seen happen to several very prominent and very large Canadian corporations over the last year and a half. Remember to always verify the credibility of your information sources to ensure that you're receiving accurate information. So again, believe it or not, folks, not everything you read is true online. So again, verify the information. Report suspicious activities and any incidents of intimidation, harassment, coercion, or threats to CSIS or to your local law enforcement authorities. So there are places online that you can go on to in order to make a report, and you can just search for CSIS on the internet or the Canadian Internet Security Service, and that'll take you to links that will help you to make the online reports or to contact somebody about that. And I know that the US and the UK, Angus, also have systems in place that you can report. And unfortunately, not always are they followed up to in a timely manner, but at least make the reports. And if it is coinciding with any ongoing investigation, or if there is a level of threat that that CSIS or the law enforcement are aware of, then they can make quicker and more immediate action on that, Angus.
Yeah, it's this story is it's a very big story, really, because of course it is affecting all major Western nations. This whole insidious agenda that's coming from various countries, but of course we focus on India. It does, of course, come from Russia and China, but almost Russia and China, we've almost come to expect that sort of activity from those nations. But India seems to be a relatively new phenomenon. And it's really only happened, I suppose, since 2014 with Narendra Modi coming to power and the BJP taking such absolute control in India. And of course, they have then stepped up since 2014. They've stepped this up. And certainly in recent years, it really has got to almost pandemic proportions, their interference in foreign politics. Because this RSS-driven agenda has really taken off, and they are desperate. Firstly, they've taken absolute control in India, so they've won the domestic battle, should we say. But they're now trying to win the battles overseas. And as India grows in global importance, certainly as it grows into potential future superpower, it's trying to ensure that all its potential rivals are already infiltrated with enough sufficiently powerful people that they can then influence local policy and domestic policy in a lot of their potential rivals. So, of course, that has been behind a lot of this. And then, of course, there is this other agenda, this obsessive agenda to try and damage and destroy the khalistan movement. Now, it does seem rather, I suppose, anomalous. Why on earth would this potential superpower be so obsessed with this tiny minority group of people? Certainly, internationally, why would it care about this group of people in India and the US and Europe, etc., and indeed Australia and New Zealand? Well, the answer is very simple, and we've highlighted it on a regular basis, is that really India is controlled by a tiny minority of people. The Brahmins, they control India. And the only group within India, the subcontinent, who actually is awake to this fact, who actually have highlighted this fact and fight and have fought this fact, is of course the Sikh community. They've fought against it since at least 1947, and in fact before then, because the Sikh community has already stood up to injustice, fairness for all, equality for all, and they treat everybody and believe everybody should be treated as equals. Of course, that runs completely counter to the whole philosophy of Brahmanism, which essentially but is based upon superiority and the superiority of the Brahmins and the caste system which keeps everybody else under enslavement. So it's the Sikh community that has always called this out, and therefore it's the Sikh community that has always formed the greatest threat to this Brahmanical control. And this is why, even in this great larger picture story of Indian superiority globally, and why India is trying to push itself as a superpower and therefore trying to influence the agenda of all these other nations, a lot of it comes down to targeting their one single major threat to their existence and their control within India, and that is the Sikh community. So bizarrely as it seems, it is this tiny number of people, just this small community that has been forced through oppression in the Punjab to spread itself around the world through the diaspora. It is this community that forms still the greatest threat to Brahmanical control and the control of the RSS. And that is why they are still, India is still fighting so hard to infiltrate the agenda of all these nations like Canada and the US and others, because it is terrified of the fact that even still now that the Sikh community are highlighting the RSS agenda. They are highlighting the Brahmanical agenda, the Brahmins. They are explaining to the world, they are waking the world up, should I say, to what's going on. And you will, of course, remember there was a Shaheed that we talked about in Canada who stood up in the Canadian Parliament and called out this very same thing. They called out the actions, the terrible actions, the genocide perpetrated by the Brahmins against the Sikh community. And he was assassinated shortly after, because once again it highlights the very fact that this tiny number of people in the Sikh community globally are the one big threat, because they are the only people who are highlighting to the world and trying to wake the world up to the threat of the Brahmins and their control of India. And so, again, this is why we exist, is part of this overall movement of the Sikh community to wake the Western world up to the fact of what is going on and what the Indian government represents and the danger it represents to both domestically in India and, of course, to the rest of the world. So this fight against misinformation, I mean, well done to Canada. Fortunately, Justin Trudeau once again has pulled an absolute blinder here. He's recognised what's going on. And as you rightly pointed out here, James, it's very clear in this whole document. A lot of this document was written with one nation in mind. It's threaded through all the terminology, all the language. It's even down to the words of trying to break up our multicultural society. This isn't about China or Russia. This is about India's divisive tactics, its agenda, its strategy to try and break up and divide the Indian diaspora, the communities between the Hindus and the Muslims, and of course the Sikhs, because this is how they're fighting it. So I think this is well done to Canada. They've woken up to this fact. Canada knows what's going on here. America's slowly coming around to the fact. Britain, to its shame, probably knows about it but is refusing to act on it. But this is, once again, Canada in the vanguard. Canada is leading the charge against this Brahmanical control, trying to extend its control internationally, James.
Yeah, and it's just become such a very hot topic in Canada because the media has also really increased coverage and trying to help to broaden the understanding by the general public of the problem, whether it was the illegal Chinese police stations or the assassination of Hardeep Singh Nijjar here in Surrey. I mean, it's a real important and pressing issue in Canada that's got to be dealt with.
Indeed it is. So let's move on now under pressure of time. We're going to go on to my section of news articles now. And actually my whole section is going to be dedicated to this fascinating scandal of Gautam Adani and his potential downfall. And of course, this is a big, big subject because although Gautam Adani his face finds itself in the target of the Justice sniper rifle, in fact, the downfall of Adani is inextricably linked to Narendra Modi, as we're going to discuss and discover. Of course, as many people have known and many people have pointed out over recent years, Gautam Adani is deeply embedded and linked to Narendra Modi. And his downfall, Adani's downfall, could really realistically bring about the downfall of Narendra Modi, because we're now seeing even the mainstream media, of course globally, and to a limited extent the Gautam media, even in India, now starting to raise an eyebrow saying, this is starting to get a little bit uncomfortable for Narendra Modi. So, James, over the next sort of 10 or 15 minutes, we're going to take an in-depth look at what actually has been going on here, what it's all about. I'm going to take a look at some of the commentators, some of their observations, some of the critiques, and in fact some of the facts about what's really been going on with this Gautam Adani. Now, there was a few days ago, over the last couple of days, a fascinating interview that was released on YouTube. And this was an interview of Dr. Irfan Nuruddin. He is a distinguished professor of Indian politics at Georgetown University, and he's also a recognised authority on US Securities and Exchange Commission, SEC, corruption cases. He's an expert. He knows a lot about Indian politics, Indian business, but also its links to the US. And he's actually been able to give a very intelligent and probably a very objective overview of what's been going on. And I'm just going to summarise. It was a fascinating interview that went on for about 40 minutes. I'm just going to summarise the salient details that came out and what he said. And basically, because he actually, in summary, he says there has been, or there is what he calls a seismic shift underway as the US indicts Gautam Adani. So, basically, in a nutshell, what is happening? Well, he summarises what's happening. He said that the US Department of Justice and the SEC, that's the Security and Exchange Commission, alleged that Adani's group paid $265 million in bribes, potentially implicating Indian state officials. He also misled US investors by failing to disclose these investigations whilst raising funds. So he's basically gone out to raise funds from investors, he's got money in from investors without actually admitting to the fact that the SEC is already investigating his company. So the charges hinge on two cornerstone US laws. They are the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, the FCPA, criminalises bribery even if done overseas. And this is really important. This isn't just bribery and corruption done in the United States, it's even if it's done overseas internationally. And that is particularly relevant to the Adani case, as we'll talk about shortly. And SEC regulations that mandate transparency to protect investors. In other words, you've got to be completely transparent. To anybody who invests in your company must know everything about your company, particularly if there are ongoing investigations by any regulatory authorities, which of course there have been in Adani's case. So Dr. Nuruddin explains what's at stake here. Firstly, he talks about what he calls the legal maze, and of course this thing about extradition, very important this. The US of course will push for Adani's extradition from India, but political resistance makes this unlikely, and this is really important. Of course, why would Narendra Modi allow Adani to be extradited to the US? Of course, we all know why. Now, the question also arises, will it be a civil or will it be a criminal case, or indeed will it be both? Now, even without extradition, the US has a lot of power because it can pursue massive fines and of course seize Adani's US-based assets, which of course are massive. It would really financially hurt Adani. And of course there is this global ripple effect. Countries like Canada and the UK, where Adani has a lot of assets invested, he has a lot of his own company assets are embedded in other nations. And the US can essentially pressure Canada and the UK to follow suit and launch their own investigations. So, what is at risk here? Well, for Adani, he faces, of course, billions in fines. I mean, and fines in a US court can literally mount to the billions, if not the tens of billions. He can have his assets seized and, of course, his global reputation tainted. I think that's an understatement. I think his global reputation will be destroyed. He'll find it very difficult to do business in any country, anywhere, probably other than India and North Korea, and, of course, Russia. But what's at risk for India? Well, allegations against Indian state officials put the Modi government in a very precarious position. It raises questions about Modi's governance and corruption, and that, of course, is massive. And then, of course, for the world, from Kenya to Sri Lanka, nations are now re-evaluating their contracts with Adani. Canada's pension fund, a major investor, could launch its own lawsuit. So even the Canada's own pension fund is potentially exposed, is vulnerable to what's going on here. So why does this matter so much to Sikh Americans? Well, under what Dr. Nuruddin calls his justice lens, the case demonstrates the power of international accountability, a principle Sikh Americans champion in the fight against transnational oppression and, of course, human rights abuses. What role does the diaspora have in this? Well, like Sikh advocacy in United States institutions, this case highlights how legal and political engagement can influence global narratives. So when I often talk about the grassroots getting out there and campaigning, this campaigning does have an effect. It really does push the pressure up that tree, up the political tree, and it really does have an influence. It does have an impact. And of course, a broader context, India's mounting legal controversies from alleged corruption to political overreach, they are now eroding India's standing as a global partner. Sikh Americans committed to justice and liberty know the value of holding power to account. Accountability, such a key word. Accountability always comes in the end. So what's next? Well, Dr. Nuruddin anticipates years of legal wrangling. He thinks it is obviously unsurprisingly probably going to take years to unwind this legal mess. Now, the defendants may avoid court appearances, but their global operations and reputations face irreparable damage. Now, for Adani's group, US expansion is, of course, unsurprisingly likely over. But for the Modi administration, it's a test of transparency and global credibility. The spotlight is on you, Mr. Modi. And of course, it's going to be quite an interesting spotlight. Looking through the legal lens at Narendra Modi, I don't think he's going to be transparent because he's clearly got an awful lot to hide. So this, as Dr. Nuruddin says, this is more than a legal battle. It's a statement. The US is drawing a line in the sand. Corruption and deception will not go unpunished, no matter how powerful the players. I'm sure Mr. Modi is now a little bit nervous about what's going on here. And the final word in the interview, Dr. Nuruddin's analysis sheds light on a complex case about more than one man or one company. It's a battle for integrity, fairness, and the rule of law. For Sikh Americans and all those who value justice, this case is a reminder that accountability is universal and it is inevitable. Wow, powerful words. I think, James, let's let you have a comment on that. I think this really points the fact that you can run, but you can't hide. That justice, the rule of law, and accountability always catches up with everyone in the end.
Absolutely, Angus. And there's several thoughts I have. And the first one starting with a recent case that of a Canadian bank that was hit by penalties and criminal charges in the United States for their part in taking part in not reporting and monitoring potential drug dealer and cartel money and all of that sort of thing. And that was the TD Bank, which has a presence in the U.S. They were just fined $1.3 billion as a part of the criminal settlement. Now, what's interesting is that unlike this case, they actually named the Toronto Dominion Bank or TD Bank as one of the defendants. Here, it's actually naming it with the indictment out of the courts in New York are naming individuals. Now, of course, we know that Gautam Adani is named, but so is Sagar Adani, Vineet Jain, Ranjit Gupta, Cyril Cabanas, Surab Agrawal, Deepak Malhotra, and Rupesh Agrawal. Now, they are named as individuals. They are not actually naming the corporation, which means that they are subject to harsher penalties when it comes to the personal level, but also that the corporation, I'm figuring, will be named in several levels of the subsidiaries and the parent corporation there. But it also has a major impact on destabilization of investors when it comes to foreign investors going to invest in India or accepting investments from India because of the disclosure that is required and the laws that prevent from the foreign influence and bribery. And that has a lot to do with, we know about blood diamonds and all these mines and such in Africa and other parts of the world where there was so much bribery going on. So that's really where it started, and it's just spread in terms of the enforcement and the different law enforcement agencies cracking down on it and the requirement to put this in reports. And finally, I would say that it also has an impact on India's credibility when it comes to the International Monetary Fund, when it comes to the World Bank. And it's going to be playing out here. And I don't think that this is something that Narendra Modi is going to walk away from unscathed, because it is a clear and signifying point that there is mass corruption still happening in India. And although Modi wants to deny it, it's very clear in this case that they are still. And again, if Modi is unaware of this, or not. I mean, it's either that he is completely incompetent in his position, or he is willfully complicit. Once again, Angus, it's up to the people to decide, but we know what's going on there.
Indeed we do, and in fact I'm going to talk about shortly how Adani is inextricably linked to Modi. And I'll just lay out loads of evidence which has been uncovered. First of all, I want to just give a little quite an interesting critique about Adani himself. This was published recently. Just a simple critique about Adani himself. This just sets out what sort of guy he is. Adani, it's headed Adani, the empire of corruption, not innovation. He doesn't create, he takes. And I want to contrast this with Tata, who died recently. And when Tata died, there was the media was full of. I just could not find a bad word about Tata and his philanthropy. How he, again, a fellow billionaire, one of the richest people on the planet, coming from India, what he achieved in his life and what he created. Compare this to Adani. Adani isn't a visionary entrepreneur. He doesn't build transformative technologies, offer groundbreaking services, or create value. Instead, his empire thrives by exploiting one thing: his insider access to one of the most corrupt systems in the world, India. A business built on bribes. The US indictment lays it bare. Adani and his associates paid over $265 million in bribe to grab India's largest solar power project. It wasn't innovation, it was exploitation. He didn't compete fairly, he rigged the system, and it's been going on for decades. Ordinary people pay the price. While Adani amasses billions, ordinary Indians are left to suffer. Families lose their homes to make way for his projects, communities are displaced, their lands polluted, workers lose jobs as monopolies shut down smaller businesses. The rich get richer, the rest pay the price. Again, contrast that with Tata. The warning signs are clear. Adani doesn't invent, he doesn't innovate, he doesn't even compete fairly. He exploits a corrupt system to cheat his way to the top. His empire isn't built to last, it's a house of cards that global regulators and investors can no longer afford to ignore. It's time to act. India's corrupt system harms us all. Corruption in India isn't just a domestic issue, it's a global menace. From financial fraud to political cronyism, India's deeply entrenched corrupt system enables a few powerful elites to thrive while leaving millions of ordinary citizens and international investors at risk. Gautam Adani is just the tip of the iceberg. His rise to power exemplifies a larger systemic issue, a rigged game where influence trumps innovation, bribes replace fair competition. This is not how a modern economy is supposed to work. Narendra Modi, take note of that. All I can say to that is ouch. That's a pretty painful but very accurate critique of India. Sums up India actually very well indeed. Modern India under Narendra Modi. It's a tragedy unfolding. Now, as a final part of this, I'm just going to just quickly run through a fascinating article that came out on the internet. This actually highlights the inextricable links between Modi's government and Adani's empire. The article is headed "Modi leads, Adani follows. Is India's diplomacy in lockstep with the private group's global expansion?" Now, what's fascinating about this is it highlights how India's international expansion, its strategic expansion, has gone hand in hand with Adani's expansion as a company. The Kenyan High Court last week suspended a proposed deal that would have given the Adani Group rights to run Nairobi Airport for 30 years, its first airport venture outside India. Notably, this expansion has closely followed in the footsteps of Prime Minister Narendra Modi's diplomatic engagements. Most Adani projects outside India, whether in the neighbourhood or further afield, were announced within months of Modi visiting the country or meeting its head of state. So this follows a pattern. Wherever Modi goes, Adani contracts follow. For example, the Kenyan president visited New Delhi in December last year. 3 months later, in March, the Adani Group submitted a proposal to upgrade and expand the airport. In June, the Kenyan authorities changed the national aviation policy and approved an airport investment plan. It took a whistleblower to highlight this fact, arguing that leasing a strategic and profitable national airport to a private entity is irrational. The whole thing stinks, in other words. So it was actually raised in the Kenyan parliament and it was actually stopped. No contract was awarded in the end to Adani. But instead, the group was awarded concessions worth $1.3 billion to construct high voltage power lines in Kenya. Suspicious, isn't it, really? And it comes at a time when the government in Bangladesh has said it was reviewing a power purchase agreement with Adani, widely seen as being tilted in favour of the conglomerate. The deal too followed in the wake of Modi's diplomacy. On his first visit to Dhaka in June 2015, Modi said India could be a major partner in fulfilling Bangladesh's electricity needs. 2 months later, Adani signed a memorandum of understanding for the export of electricity. The implementation agreement followed 2 years later during Sheikh Hasina's visit in April 2017. Now, of course, since the regime change, that deal threatens to come undone. What a surprise. But this follows a pattern. When Modi became Prime Minister in 2014, the Adani Group's projects outside India, this is before 2014, Adani's projects outside India were limited to coal mining operations in Indonesia and Australia. But now, in the last 10 years, since Modi's been in power, they span a wide range of infrastructure sectors across Asia and Africa. They've gone global. In Sri Lanka, for example, an official of the Electricity Board said that President Gotabaya Rajapaksa told him in 2021 that Modi was pressuring him to hand over a wind energy project to the Adani Group. This was days after Modi met Rajapaksa after the climate change conference in the UK. After the revelation caused an uproar in Sri Lanka, the official retracted his remarks and resigned from his position. In other words, he was pressured out of power for actually whistleblowing the fact that once again Modi has handed a contract to Adani in Sri Lanka. In March 2017, Modi hosted Malaysia's Prime Minister Najib Tun Razak in India, where the two discussed how to boost economic links between the two countries. And the business prospects of Indian firms. A month later, Adani Group signed an MOU with a Malaysian infrastructure conglomerate to develop a mega container port project. In June 2018, Modi travelled to Singapore, where he met the Prime Minister. That month, state-owned investment firm Temasek invested 1,000 crore rupees in Adani ports. Modi hosted the Tanzania's president in Delhi in October 23. 8 months later, the Adani Group bagged a 30-year concession agreement to operate a container terminal at the Dar es Salaam port. It also entered into a JV with Abu Dhabi's AD Ports Group to acquire 95% in the company, providing terminal services. In Vietnam, Prime Minister Pham Minh Chanh came to Delhi in August 2024. The same day he met Modi, he also met Gautam Adani, announcing that the Adani Group was considering investing in 2 airports in Vietnam, close on the heels of its plans to build a seaport. He hosted Israel's Prime Minister Netanyahu in January 2018. 8 months later, the Adani Group, in a JV with Israeli firm Elbit Systems, inaugurated a facility in Telangana to manufacture aerial military drones. In 2022, the Adani Group went on to acquire Haifa port in Israel. Gautam Adani, the chairman of the Adani Group, is known for his proximity to the Indian Prime Minister. Both men are from the state of Gujarat. There's that Gujarat connection yet again we often talk about. Since 2014, when Modi became Prime Minister, the Adani Group has aggressively expanded and diversified its business, becoming the largest private owner of airports, seaports, coal mines, power stations and gas stations in India. Crony capitalism is running rife. Speaking in Parliament in 2023, Congress leader Rahul Gandhi said, "This is not India's foreign policy. This is Adani's foreign policy." Many observers view Adani's global expansion through the geopolitical lens of India wanting to counter China's growing influence in Asia and Africa, largely manifested through the infrastructure-focused Belt and Road initiatives. Interesting, the final point of this article, protests in Kenya could easily convert into anger against India and the Indian government since Gautam Adani is seen as a friend of Modi. Now, essentially, it's all laid out in black and white. This isn't, one could argue, look, this is about India trying to counter China's growing influence globally. China, of course, as we often report, has bought up all sorts of infrastructure around particularly Africa and Asia. It's secured natural resources. So you could argue that this is India's counter to that. India's following its own interests and trying to do the same. Well, yes, if it wasn't the fact it's just one company, Adani Group. This is Gautam Adani. If it was several Indian conglomerates that's been handed these contracts, there is a defence for that argument. Instead, it is one group, Gautam Adani, which immediately sends alarm bells. And this is the one group, Adani, who's already been seen as being corrupt himself, who's already been seen as spending money, billions of dollars in bribes globally. That's what the current thing is all about in the United States. So this is one corrupt billionaire being handed contracts all around the world by Narendra Modi. Now, if you can't see a link there, you need to go back to school. In other words, Gautam Adani is very clearly, allegedly, paying a lot of money to Narendra Modi. One wonders how much Narendra Modi personally is worth. We'll never know the truth in that, but clearly Narendra Modi is going to be worth billions after all this. Well, one wonders. So the real point here, James, is firstly, there is no doubt that Adani is inextricably linked to Modi. That's all well and good. It's going to drag down India's reputation. It's certainly dragging down Modi's reputation. The important point here, though, and relevant for us, though, is this going to be the thing that brings Modi down? I think it potentially could do. Who knows? We will see. It's great news for the Sikh community. Modi is being seen for what he is, basically a corrupt politician. The sad thing is, though, and as I pointed out, is that, and actually I'll refer you to a podcast coming out this week, later on this week, where we talk about Modi and his corruption, etc. In more detail. We talk about Gautam Adani in great detail, and I'll also point to the podcast we did last week where we touched on this. Is Modi just another figurehead? He's just another puppet of the Brahmins. Once Modi goes, and he will go in the end, he can't stay there forever, and if this is the thing that brings him down, fantastic. But ultimately, will he be replaced by just another figurehead, another puppet of the Brahmins? Yes, probably. We'll see, James. But anyway, at least let's take it one step at a time. This is potentially the downfall of Narendra Modi.
Absolutely, and I don't think it's going to stop here with one company. I think that there's going to be a lot of eyes turning towards India, but towards the government, not only Narendra Modi, but also at different state levels from around the world. I think that with the global reach of the Adani Group, we are going to see investigations worldwide. And as you said, there's the Canadian Pension Fund has a very, very large holding there. So, I don't think we're done hearing about this or other companies that are involved in bribery, blackmail, and other scandals.
Well, keep watching, keep tuned to this show because we will follow this story in great detail. I think it could be the story of this of next year. It's a massive story of this. And this could be the thing that brings Modi down. Right, we're well over time as always, so we're going to whip through into the comment section. And unfortunately, we have to whip through these as well because we're running out of time. John Wick, a really, really interesting point. Thank you for this, John Wick. Our optimism about Trump, you're saying maybe it's misplaced. And unfortunately, again, we don't have time to go into detail about this. But you talk about the appointment of Tulsi Gabbard to head the intelligence services. Tulsi Gabbard links potentially to the RSS in Hindutva. Is this good news? No, it really isn't. Potentially, this means that the RSS have a very highly placed individual, or at least somebody who has at least the era of the RSS in the new US Trump administration. That is worrying. I think you're absolutely right. But as you rightly point out, Trump is a businessman. He will do what's right for America, what's right for his administration. And I think your point, and again, sadly we don't have time to go through it in detail, I think your point is really bang on. I think you raise a very, very strong point here. Is Trump the best thing for the Sikh community? I don't know. And I think we all have a lot of faith in Trump. I think actually overall he will be good for America, and I think he would be good for world stability, global stability, for all the reasons that we discussed before. Is he good for the Sikh community? I certainly hope so, as indeed you do hope so in your comment. James, I think we've talked about this a lot. I think the jury is out, but we keep our fingers crossed.
Keep our fingers crossed, Angus. And you know my theory. I think that the only person that Trump will be good for is for himself and nobody else, but that's my opinion. So I'll leave it at that because I can rant for hours.
Indeed, as could I. Let's not go down that rabbit hole. Let us move on very quickly. Thank you, John Wick, for that comment. M. Verdi says, good morning to you. India will never extradite Vikas Yadash because essentially he knows all the secrets and the CIA want to get their hands on him. India will side with Russia. Yeah, absolutely. I will hopefully cover this to some degree tomorrow in a story about supplying arms to Russia. Again, Bhajan Singh Binder and I did a fascinating podcast that I'll try and upload in the next few days. This is all about that. Do watch that. There are frightening historic ties that I wasn't even aware of. There is a treaty signed between India and Russia dating back earlier, post-partition, which basically is like the NATO treaty. You attack India, you attack Russia. You attack Russia, you attack India. Yes, it's one of those treaties that actually exists. Watch the podcast coming out with Bhajan Singh Binder later this week. But thank you for that comment. You're absolutely bang on. It is frightening, actually. VJ San says, it's amazing. Oh, this is a good point. Societies that inherited a history of savagery and genocides are busy accusing others of the same crime that brought prosperity for themselves. Iraq, Libya, Afghanistan, countless others during colonialism. I think this point, in a nutshell, is all about Western hypocrisy. Yes, I agree with you. And as I keep saying, I totally agree with you. We have stood on our pulpit in the West and dictated to third world countries saying you cannot go through dreadful human rights abuses, genocides, etc. It goes against morality. Well, we say that from our pulpit when in fact that is what we did in the past as empires. Yes, and we call it out as hypocrisy. But what I would say in defence of it is that we have since evolved. Our empires occurred a long time ago, and that we have evolved. We are now punishing ourselves for our own sins of the past. I would also say don't blame the current people like James and I, and all the citizens of our nations now. We are not responsible for the crimes of our fathers, and we are now calling out hypocrisy where we see it, James, are we not?
Absolutely. And I mean, I can point directly at the history of the First Nations and the Aboriginal here in Canada and Indigenous communities, right there in itself as to a very dark period of Canadian history that really we've been there too.
We're all human beings. And unfortunately, within human nature, there is that very small percentage of people who are driven by the need to dominate and to control. And that is that is the root of all wars. That is what happened throughout history. And you can go back to the Roman times, you can go back to Carthage times, you can go back to Genghis Khan. Everybody's been guilty of it. That's just how the world has moved, how it's evolved. And we just have to evolve to a higher plane of existence. And that is what we try to do. That's what Sikh is all about, etc., etc. So thank you for that comment. Yes, we call out Western hypocrisy because we know it exists. Ramendra Sahai says, oh yeah, this is interesting. In defense of Hindus. Now, again, I'm going to preface what these next two comments by saying we are not an anti-Hindu channel, despite the fact that a lot of our audience really have a thing against Hindus because of the suffering that they have endured under Hindu control. And absolutely, we will never defend that suffering. That was dreadful what some Hindus have perpetrated upon Sikhs and Muslims and other minorities. Yeah. But we, as a whole, do not paint all Hindus with the same brush. So, Ramendra Sahai points out Hindus are followers of Sanatan Dharma in its pure forms, which promotes non-violation, promotes world peace. They are found globally living peacefully, etc., etc. Unity means Hinduism from Jew to human. Yes, absolutely. I don't know much about Hinduism, I must confess, but I'm sure that Hinduism does actually represent peace and humanity and lots of wonderful things. The problem comes when it's the extremists, and it's the same in all religions. Christians have their own extremists. Islam has its extremists. All religions, bar a very, very few, have their extremists. It's those extremists that we need to stamp out. And it's the Hindu extremists, the RSS and the Brahmins, that is the problem. That is who we focus our anger and our ire and our sights upon, James, do we not?
Absolutely. And this is just a really important point that, again, we love all people. We just call out the political end of it and the Hindutva and those who are causing the problems. But we know that, again, we don't paint everybody with the same brush, Angus. And that's something that we often state that, we don't have a problem with India. We don't have a problem with Hindus. We love all people. We love the culture and what India stands for, except for the political end of it and the Brahmin setup.
And it's also worth reminding people that Khalistan will open its doors in welcome to Hindus across the world, across India, to come and live in Khalistan because it treats everybody as equal, all religions as equal. That is how the Sikh Empire was governed before, and that is how the new Sikh Empire, Khalistan, will be governed in future. So there will be a warm welcome extended to all Hindus and people of all faith. So, Gautam Adani says, one thing very important for the US, they shouldn't hand over to India. They should investigate basically, I think to summarise this comment, that the US should pursue all criminal investigations into the Bishonois, etc., etc. Absolutely they should. And I think this whole Adani case is fantastic because it highlights this very fact that the US is driving hand in hand with Canada. They are driving accountability. They are pursuing the rule of law. They are pursuing justice on this. And I think the movement is in the right direction. And this, again, is partly due to pressure from the Sikh community. I think the Sikh community can pat themselves on the back because they have been behind a lot of the pressure that has pushed North America particularly into this sort of action. Right, James, I'm going to quickly move on to, I have to say, my favourite section of the show. I've named it Critics Corner. We've had loads of wonderfully critical comments. Let's whip through these. Stop the Kool-Aid says, these two people are completely agenda-driven. Yes, we are, and we're the first to admit it. They are misplacing facts and background to manipulate their audience. No, we're not, though. Either that or maybe they're completely uneducated. Well, I think James and I are actually pretty well educated. Don't worry about that. We are. Please don't believe what these two are saying to you. Read up and do your own research. You'll find a completely different picture. Yes, I agree with you. Go and do your own research. We say that often to our audience. Go out there. Find the truth. Don't lap up the Gautam media, this one-sided nonsense that pours out of India, this propaganda, this complete misinformation. Do what we do, which is go out there and research. We're not manipulating our audience. We're not misplacing facts or background. You point out to us. Point out what is factually incorrect. This is what I say to all our critics who weighed in with these comments. Explain to us. Correct us, and if we're wrong, we'll be the first ones to admit our mistakes, that we're wrong. We do it regularly when we get it wrong, or we do something wrong. So please tell us what we're doing wrong. And we are agenda driven. We have an agenda to bring the truth, to counteract the nonsense misinformation that comes out of India. Yeg Ron says, 2 actors paid to pretend. I've tried acting in the past and I'm rubbish at it, James. I don't know about you, but I'm a rubbish actor. So I'm actually flattered that you think I'm a good actor, so thank you for that. What is clearly a Khalistani propaganda channel? Yes, we are. Welcome to the channel. We are indeed pro-Khalistan and proud of it because it stands up for all the good things that we represent. And to continue, Darius says, divide and rule, same old mean British tactic. Oh, right, now this is actually where we get serious. You forgot the Jallianwala Bagh massacre, which occurred in 1919. British killed many Bengalis and now crying for human rights. What a hypocrite. Yes, absolutely. I agree with you. Totally agree with you. Divide and rule. It is an old British tactic that the Empire used, that now India is using. The Jallianwala Bagh massacre, 1919, disgusting, disgraceful. It is a shameful stain on British history. I stand up and admit it. I wasn't there, so I'm not responsible for it, but I am quite happy to stand up and say, yeah, it is a stain on British history, as indeed 1984 is a stain on Indian history. So stand up and own it, like I own and we own our own stains in our history. We are the first. Now, if you look at British media, we are regularly, on a daily basis, shaming ourselves for acts that we did in the past, in the days of empire. That's what we're doing. Are you doing it in India? No, you're not. So that's hypocrisy. And then finally, James, before I hand over to you, Curious Cynic says, I like this guy's comments, very sensible comments. Hugely selective narrative, clueless about, this is interesting, clueless about Khalistani's real motives and activities. Well, I'm fascinated what you think are the real motive of Khalistanis, because I thought James and I knew what the Khalistan motives were. We represent, I am friends with the people who run this channel, who are absolutely pure, thoroughbred Khalistanis. They are fighting hard in every possible way, peaceful, democratic way, for Khalistan. So I thought I was aware of what real Khalistanis' motives were. If you think they're different, let me know, because I'm genuinely curious to know what we're wrong about Khalistan's motives. And it is not a hugely selective narrative. All we're doing is we are relaying the truth as we find it across media and across social media. Again, if you think we're not doing it right, let us know where. Point to some specifics. Helps to have some integrity and do decent homework. Well, we do an awful lot of homework and we have a huge amount of integrity. That is why we are doing this show. So actually, Curious Cynic, I have to disagree with your comment on a very respectful note. And I'm genuinely interested what you think real Khalistani's motives are. Please let us know. And then you do go on to actually very serious, a good point here. FBI is getting hormonal before Biden leaves. This is about Biden's administration allowing missiles to be used against Russia and Ukraine. You think it's more FBI based? You think it's just a bit of mischief? No, this is more than mischief. This is potentially starting World War III. I think you're minimising the impact of this. And then nicely dressed with selected clothes, a load of garbage from the FBI. Yeah, okay. James, on all those, your comments about our Critics Corner.
I would like to say, first of all, I wasn't there in 1919, so I'm definitely not a hypocrite because I was not there. I was not the one there preaching or making policy that destroyed human rights for so many, whether it was in Canada, whether it was in Japan, whether it was in China, in Africa. I wasn't there breaching the human rights of anybody. And therefore, you cannot say that we're hypocrites if we weren't there. We didn't support that, and nor will we ever support the abuse and the downplay of anyone based on color, creed, religion, race, caste. It doesn't matter. We believe in equality for everybody. So yeah, I would disagree with your statement of what a hypocrite is. Obviously, you need to check that. But at the end of the day, once again, we are a station, we are a niche station. We are not the CBC, the BBC, or Sky News. We are here looking at the misinformation and countering the misinformation of the India government, the Hindutva, and others when they talk all of this crap about the Khalistan movement. And we bring a truth to it. In most situations, you'll see that we actually put up our research or the information that we are referring to. And a lot of it will come from mainstream media or government or very reputable sources. And we do our homework. We don't just pick out any article that somebody's posted on Google. We do our research. And if you disagree with it, by all means, reach out to us and actually go into detail on to what specifics you're referring to, not generalizations, because that doesn't tell us anything.
And if you want to be rude to us, just be rude to us. We love it. As I say, Critics Corner has become my favourite section because, when we get intelligent criticisms, they're great to actually have an intelligent debate about it. And when we get rude comments, they're just great for a laugh. So thank you for those anyway. So keep those coming. Thank you to each of you in our Critics Corner for your comments. It's always great for a bit of banter.
Hey, we're well dressed.
We're well dressed. Indeed, absolutely. And let's move on to the final set of comments. James Angus, sincerely thank you for standing with the oppressed and marginalised Sikh schools. It is a pleasure and it is an honour. And thank you for your comment. Can you send me info how we can support you both? And Coombe says, yeah, really appreciate you guys. Is there a way we can support you? I would refer you, as I said, to what I said at the beginning of the show. Please have a look in our description section below. You'll find the link tree. Go to our website. You are now able to donate directly to the channel, and every donation will be very much appreciated, even if it's just a few cents. It doesn't matter. It all counts. It helps us keep the channel going. So thank you indeed for asking. Your support is massively appreciated. Thank you for that. Mukhtar Singh says, can someone advise me how we can arrange to have the Khalistan referendum in Malaysia? Well, actually, what I would advise you, I don't know how big the Sikh diaspora is in Malaysia, maybe you can let us know, but get in contact with Sikhs for Justice, Gautam Singh Panoon and his associates. Get in touch, Sikhs for Justice. They are the organisers of the referendum, and who knows? It may come to you in time. For all we know, it may actually be planned for that. I don't know, but all I would say is get in touch with Sikhs for Justice. They are the organisers of the referendum. And then the final comment comes from Lak Birai, who says, Khalistan Zindabad, Wahiguruji ka Khalsa, Wahiguruji ki Fateh. Yes, I couldn't have said it better myself. A fantastic statement to finish the show once again. So, as always, thank you very much indeed for all of your support. Thank you for all your comments, whether it's in the Critics Corner or whether it's all the rest of you who've been sending really interesting comments, educational comments, fascinating comments, or just a simple thanks for everything. It is very much appreciated. Keep those comments coming. We do love to talk about them. Don't forget you can message us directly at message@satellitetv.com if there's anything you'd like to bring to our attention that you don't want to put in the public domain. But in the meantime, that is it for another show. Thank you so much for watching as always. It is a goodbye from me and it's a goodbye from James.
Stay safe.
You have been watching Perspectives. We will see you next time.